What a man sees when he looks at a mountain is determined by the imagination, the training, the sensitivity of the mind behind the eyes, by what he knows and feels. So his subject must be selected with a knowledge of the camera's powers and its limitations.
Hi, thanks for joining me. In Photography 101, we are often told that the best snaps happen when we have the sun at our back and the subjects directly in front of us. Now, this is solid advice, but it often doesn't produce the most interesting photographs. Straightforward lighting can make one's subjects look bland or even washed out in harsh light. Photographers often experience a resistance to moving into a position where the sun is shining towards the lens, and this is because the situation becomes less controllable. But it also provides opportunities to inject a sense of drama and mood into your photographs. Photographers like Edwin Weston figured this out a long time ago. In these first two examples, he's used shadows to create contrast and accentuate texture, as well as shape. In this example of a tomato farm, he photographed the situation using oblique backlighting, and he manages to separate the backlit plants from the shadowed earth. This contrast then accentuates the lines and the patterns within the field. In this portrait of his of Mexican poet and painter Naui Olin, he's deliberately used the shadow to accentuate the features and to create an eerie cinematic shot. In this video, I'm going to take a look at how photographers shooting in various genres and situations take on the challenge of backlighting.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the...
It doesn't matter whether you're taking portraits or architectural shots or shooting on the street. Being aware of backlighting can increase the ways that you can approach your subject. I've never woken up in the morning and thought, hey, I'm going to really hit the backlit images today. It's more something that comes to mind either by chance or when I'm feeling frustrated that direct sun isn't working. I remember when I was photographing for an annual report, and one of the locations had an incredibly dark and dirty factory where they made the steel cables that haul the cages up and down mine shafts. It just seemed an impossible task to make an interesting photograph. But then I saw there was light streaming through a window, and as soon as I shifted to the other side of the light source, the highlights became the interesting feature. All of the grubby factory detail was lost in the shadows, and the textures and the shapes created by the cables came alive. This shot of a drilling platform 1 kilometer underground was very uninteresting when I tried to light it from the other side. But when I got someone to hold a light source on the opposite side of the drill, the setup took on a sense of drama. These three images were part of a feature for the Sunday Telegraph. They were shot at the location where the Battle of Isartwana took place in 1789. The British were overwhelmed by the Zulu army and were defeated. I needed to convey how these unsuspecting English soldiers must have felt when they were overpowered and cut down by thousands of angry, spear-carrying Zulus. The backlit images of the cairns and graves added to the somber mood of the story. Backlighting doesn't mean that the light source is necessarily pointing directly into the camera, although obviously it can. Shifting one's position to the shadow side requires an adjustment of what you as the photographer are concentrating on. The shadows become key to the composition. In these shots of the sand dunes in Sossusvlei in Namibia, the graphic quality of the dark areas is what creates the form. In both of these images, the highlights juxtaposed against the darker background becomes the central focus of the image. The layering of the mountains immediately becomes visible, and here the smoke from the coal fires emphasizes the environmental aspects of poverty. Making the subject a complete silhouette is always dicey because it's so easy to slip into the domain of the romantic Hallmark card. So approach these with caution and try bring complex elements into the composition so that you detract from the fact that you've maximized contrast. There's quite a lot of information out there on how to produce portraits, wedding photos, and fashion shots using backlighting. So I thought it might be more interesting to show you how some well-known photographers have utilized this technique. This wildlife photographer, Amit Eshel, has made backlighting one of his signature techniques. To succeed as a wildlife photographer these days is really challenging. Every wildlife tourist has one or two decent images in their collection. So to be competitive, he's made lighting central to his success. A frontally lit version of any of these images just wouldn't have the kick that these do. With street photography or photojournalism, there are a whole number of factors that are competing for the photographer's attention. The external factors can sometimes overwhelm one's thought processes, and it can become difficult to see the big picture. Sometimes by just moving around the subject, one introduces a whole different set of options. This shot by life photographer Eugene Richards has become an icon. And instead of photographing these kids straight on, he's created a sense of adventure and possibly danger by shooting against the light. The shadow areas form a perfect frame for the subjects. In these two shots, you can see how Paolo Pellegrin has delivered a dark and menacing mood. You are not being given a lot of detail. The shadows are obscuring much of the frame, and all we get to see is the outline of these people. It forces us to ask questions about their surroundings and also the circumstances that led up to this moment. In these two people-based shots, he's transformed fairly bland situations into atmospheric moments. His style is fluid, so blown-out flaring just adds to the complexity of the frame. Pellegrin seems happy to add many distractions in order to produce layering in his images. Gary Winogrand was also fearless when it came to shooting into the sun. This is a famous shot of a woman taking a picture at a NASA rocket liftoff, pointing her camera in the opposite direction from the launch pad. Winogrand not only ignored the big event to focus on this cameo, but he was prepared to open up the shutter for the shadow detail and risk having too much light falling on his lens. In this instance, he probably had a lens hood on to reduce flare, but in Pellegrin's case, he probably chose to maximize the glow. Winogrand shots of people walking down the sidewalk are transformed into extraordinary dynamic moments. Some photographers choose to fill in the shadow detail using flashes mounted on the camera, or they can carry an off-camera flash which produces a slightly oblique light. Martin Parr uses fill-in flash brilliantly when he shoots against the light source. He captures what in most circumstances would be described as too much information. In his case though, he's highlighting the garish aspect of his subject matter. All the gloss makes the scene look tacky and tired and sad. Architecture is another field that is perfect for backlighting. Generally, one's interested in showing line and how the light flows through the structures. I selected these from Pixabay and take a look how the buildings become sculpted by the back-sourced light. For the viewer, the highlights are not the interesting part of the photograph. one is drawn to what is going on, the detail in the midtones and the shadows. I've saved the best for last. Chinese photographer Fan Ho has been described as a minimalistic genius. He would approach his cityscapes like a painter, capturing life on the streets by emphasizing light and shadows. As a minimalist, he often looked for ways to isolate his subjects against a background that had limited detail. So out of all of the photographers that I've looked at, Ho seems to be someone who's completely comfortable with backlighting. He mostly shot at dusk, and he repeatedly photographs into the light without losing the essence of the activity that he's trying to capture. I'll run through a selection of his images, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.